האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dobra V'Etcher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Haazinu. We're going to do Os Aleph, section number 1. It's a very long piece, and so we're only going to do part 1 of section Aleph. Before we begin, we're going to take a look at a pasuk at the towards the end of Parshas Nitzavim from a couple of weeks ago, and then we'll look at the first pasuk in our Parsha, Parshas Haazinu. So this is Nitzavim. Perek Lamed Pasuk Yud Tes. Ha'idosi bochem hayom. I have called to testify on you today, as hashamayim ve'es ha'aretz, the heavens and the earth, hachayim ve'hamavis nasati lefanecha. I have placed in front of you life and death, habracha ve'hakala, the klala, the blessing and the curse, uvacharta b'chayim, and you should choose life. Lemantichya, in order that you shall live, atot v'zarecha, you and your children. Okay, so in this pasuk, Hashem talks about calling forth the shamayim and the aretz, the heavens and the earth, as witnesses on the Jewish people, something regarding the Jewish people. Okay, now let's go to our pasuk and the beginning of our parsha, Haazinu, Perek Lamed Beis, pasuk Aleph. Haazinu hashamayim va'adabera. Listen, shamayim, and I shall speak. V'sishma ha'aretz imrei fi, and listen the earth to the words of my mouth. So the way these two psukim seem to fit together is that at the end of Parshas Nitzavim, Moshe Rabbeinu was telling the Jewish people, I'm going to call upon the Shamayim and the Aretz, the heavens and the earth, to be witnesses. And here in Parshas Haazinu, Hashem is talking, Moshe Rabbeinu is actually talking to the Shamayim and the Aretz and calling them to be witnesses. So it's the same idea, the same concept of the Shamayim and the Aretz being called upon as witnesses about the Jewish people's actions, but in Parshas Nitzavim, it was Moshe telling the Jewish people he was going to do this, and in Parshas Haazinu, it's Moshe Rabbeinu actually talking to just telling Shamayim and Aretz to be witnesses. Okay, we'll see that that's a very important distinction as we go through this piece. One more thing we need to realize, one more point we need to realize before we begin the text of the Zera Shimshon, is that the Zera Shimshon is going to talk about Rashi's explanation on the pasuk in Parshas Nitzavim that we just read, and Rashi's explanation on the pasuk here in our Parsha of Haazinu. And it's going to become clear that if a person looks at our text of Rashi, it doesn't exactly jive perfectly, align perfectly with Zera Shimshon's presentation of what Rashi says. So it seems that Zera Shimshon had what's called a different girsa, a different text of the Rashi's commentary on Chumash, which of course is happens as things were written. Rashi lived 1,000 years ago, and everything in his time, it was before printing, was handwritten manuscripts. And when the handwritten manuscripts were printed, there were sometimes different versions and slightly different texts in Rashi's commentary, as there were in other things. Sometimes in the Gemara we find this as well. And so it seems clear that Zera Shimshon had a somewhat different text in Rashi than we have in our Rashis today. Let us begin. Os Aleph. Haazinu hashamayim. Listen, heaven. Perush Rashi. Rashi explains. Haazinu hashamayim. Listen, heaven. Shani masra bahem b'Yisrael. I am using you to warn the Jewish people. V'siyu edem badovar, and you will be witnesses. Shamayim and Aretz, you will be witnesses about this. V'chein v'sishma haaretz, and that's what it's meant when Moshe continues in this pasuk and says, listen, earth. V'lama heid bohem shamayim v'aretz. This is Rashi asking an important question. Why did Moshe call upon the Shamayim and the Aretz to be witnesses about the Jewish people's conduct? Omar Moshe. Moshe said, Ani bosor vadam. I am flesh and blood. L'mochar ani meis. I'm about to die. Im yomu Yisrael. If the Jewish people say at some point after I die, lo ki balnu aleinu habris. We did not accept upon ourselves the covenant with Hashem. If the Jewish people tried to deny that they accepted the covenant and the Torah from Hashem and accepted to serve Hashem, mi ba'u machachisham. Who can come and contradict them? All the people alive who might be able to contradict them will at some point die. Therefore, Moshe called upon the Shamayim and the Aretz to testify. Because the Shamayim and the Aretz can serve as witnesses forever. Because if they merit it, if the Jewish people act the way they're supposed to act and observe the mitzvos the way they're supposed to, the heavens and the earth can come and give rewards to the people, v'chulei, etc. The etc. says if God forbid the Jewish people don't behave the way they're supposed to, then the heavens and the earth can bring punishment upon the Jewish people. So right here, let's pause. It certainly looks that Rashi, according to the way the Zera Shimshon is quoting him, is saying, is presenting two reasons here as to why Moshe called upon the heaven and the earth. Reason number one, because they exist forever and will be able to always provide testimony that the Jewish people accepted the Torah and accepted the covenant with Hashem and are responsible to keep the mitzvos. And number two, if they don't, then the Shamayim and Aretz can bring punishment. And if they do, then the Shamayim and Aretz can bring reward. So they're perfect witnesses. They exist forever and they can actually act on the situation. If the Jewish people do the right thing, God willing, the rewards can come from Shamayim and Aretz. If the Jewish people, God forbid, do the wrong thing, then punishments can come from Shamayim and Aretz. It looks like two different reasons. But as we mentioned a few moments ago, the Zera Shimshon puts the two reasons together and presents them as if they're one big reason. And we'll see later on that that's exactly how he understands this Rashi to be presenting one reason as opposed to two reasons. We'll get into that in a little bit. Makshim HaMeforshim, the commentators ask a question on Rashi. Parshas Nitzavim, back in Parshas Nitzavim, which is the pasuk we looked at, Kosuv Rashi Shnei Ta'amim Acherim. Rashi wrote two other reasons besides this one reason as to why Moshe called upon the Shamayim and Aretz. Why didn't Rashi also write this reason that he just presented here about She'im Yizku Yavo Ha'edim, if the Jewish people merit it by good actions, the Shamayim and Aretz as witnesses will come and reward them. Why didn't Rashi mention that reason back in Parshas Nitzavim when he mentioned two other reasons? So the first question that Zera Shimshon presents us with is he's telling us already that back in Parshas Nitzavim, Rashi gave two reasons as to why Moshe called upon the Shamayim and the Aretz to be witnesses on the Jewish people's behavior. And here in Parshas Haazinu, Rashi gives a new reason, a third reason, a different reason, which is that the Shamayim and the Aretz as witnesses can reward and punish the Jewish people. If we do the right thing, the Shamayim can bring rain and other benefits. If we do the wrong thing, God forbid, the Shamayim and Aretz, the crops won't grow from the ground and the rain won't come at the right time. So that's the reason here. But we're going to see in Parshas Nitzavim two other reasons. And the question is, why didn't Rashi put all three reasons together back in Parshas Nitzavim? And for that matter, why didn't Rashi, if he wanted to repeat them, say all three reasons here? Why did he split up the reasons? Next paragraph. Va'al hatam sheperish b'parshas Nitzavim. And the reason that Rashi gave in Parshas Nitzavim as to why Moshe called upon the heaven and the earth, this, by the way, is the second reason over there in Rashi. Amar Moshe, and here's a quote. Moshe said, "Histaklu b'shamayim va'aretz." Moshe told the Jewish people, look at the heavens and the earth, shebarosi l'shamesh eschem, that Hashem created to serve you. Shema shinu es midosam, did the shamayim and the aretz ever change their nature? Uma elu shelo nivru lo l'sochar v'lo le'onish. And the shamayim and the aretz, which were not created to be able to receive rewards or suffer consequences, she'im zochem ein nodlim sechar. If the shamayim and the aretz do exactly what God created them for, they don't merit any particular reward. And if the shamayim and the aretz sin, if such a thing is possible, they don't receive any kind of punishment. Kachatem, so too you. She'im tekaimu tekablu schar. If you do the right thing and fulfill God's will, you will receive a reward. V'im ta'avru, and if you transgress God's will, tekablu onesh, you're going to receive a punishment. Alachas kama v'kama. How much more so should you follow Hashem's will and not deviate and not depart, just like Shamayim and Aretz do exactly what Hashem created them to do, and they don't deviate from Hashem's ratzon, from Hashem's will. So this obviously is a different reason. This is one of the reasons, one of the two reasons that Rashi brings on in Parshas Nitzavim as to why Moshe called upon the Shamayim and the Aretz to be witnesses, and this is a different reason than the reason Rashi gives here in Haazinu. Od Makshim. So the Zera Shimshon kind of digresses a little bit, almost parenthetically, and says, before we get into the issue about the reasons being split up, we need to realize that there's another question here. Shahari Matzinu, because we find Sheha'aret Shinsa Midosa V'nensha. We actually do find in Chazal this idea that the earth changed what it was supposed to do and was in fact punished. So the Zera Shimshon is now in the next paragraph going to bring a source that talks about the earth changing from what Hashem wanted it to do, commanded it to do, and being punished for that. Next paragraph. The Isa b'medrash, it states in the Medrash Rabbah, Arura ha'adama ba'avurecha. When after the chait of Adam and Chava eating from the fruit of the Eitz Hadas, there are punishments dished out, of course, and Hashem says to Adam, Arura ha'adama va'avurecha, the earth will be cursed because of you. And here's a statement by one of Chazal. Omar Rabbi Yehuda said, we're moving now to the column, to the top of the column on the left. Rabbi Yehuda said, Sheha'aret shinsa midasa. Why was the earth cursed? The earth didn't do anything wrong, seemingly. No, the earth changed from what it was supposed to do. She'omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because Hashem had said, when he was creating the world during the 6 days of creation, Hashem said, Eitz pri, oseh pri. Hashem told the earth, I want you to bring forth a tree of fruit that makes fruit. What does it mean, a tree of fruit, an eitz pri? Sheyiyeh tam ha'etz ketam ha'pri. Hashem's desire was that a tree, that the earth would bring forth trees, fruit trees, that the wood of the tree had the same taste as the fruit of the tree. So let's imagine you're standing in front of a beautiful apple tree. Not only could you pick an apple and taste the delicious fruit, you could take off a piece of the bark of the tree and taste the delicious apple flavor. And that's was Hashem's plan, to have an eitz pri, oseh pri, a tree of fruit, literally a fruit tree, and it makes fruit. It does both things. V'hilo osis akain. But the earth did not follow that command. Ela eitz oseh pri. but the earth brought forth trees that made fruit. The trees themselves could not be called literally fruit trees because the bark of the trees themselves couldn't be eaten, didn't taste like the fruit, but they osepri, they did make fruit, and people could eat the fruit. And because of this, because the earth did not follow exactly Hashem's orders, Kishen is Kalel Adam, when Adam was cursed, Nifkada Gamhi al Avonah, the earth was also punished on its departure, on its sin, meaning its departure from Hashem's Ratzon. So there's no doubt that that's a very unusual and strange idea that the earth did something different than what Hashem wanted, because obviously the earth, as far as we know, doesn't have free will, and everything Hashem said, when we read the story of creation, everything Hashem said, that's what happened. So how could the earth depart and deviate from Hashem's will is an excellent question, but that would take us way far afield, and that's not the Zera Shimshon's issue right now. His issue is to say, why did Rashi bring down this reason in Parshas Nitzavim that Moshe called upon the Shamayim and Aretz to be Eidim and to testify about the Jewish people's behavior, and specifically chose Shamayim and Aretz because he wanted to make the point to the Jewish people, look at the Shamayim and Aretz, they do exactly what Hashem said, they've never deviated, they never will deviate. When we have a chazal in the Medrash that says that the earth did deviate right in the beginning at the time of Brias HaOlam. And in fact, we'll see that the earth, in the next paragraph, that the earth was punished for this. V'od matzinu b'makam acher. We find in a different place, sheha'aretz kibla onesh, that the earth received a punishment for this thing that it did. Kidi amrina b'perek daled Sanhedrin, as Chazal say in the 4th chapter of Maseches Sanhedrin, miyom shepascha ha'aretz es piha, from the day that the earth opened its mouth, the kiblato ledamo shel Hevel, and it received the blood of Hevel. Of course, we know the story, the terrible story, the infamous story when Cain and Hevel had an argument, and Cain rose up and slew his brother Hevel. This is the famous Cain and Abel from the beginning of the Torah. So Cain killed Hevel, and the Torah tells us that the earth swallowed up Hevel's blood and made it disappear. So the earth hid the evidence of the crime. Shuv lo pascha. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, after it did that, it was punished, and it could no longer open its mouth for good purposes. Shenemar, as the pasuk in Yeshaya says, mikanaf ha'aretz. The pasuk over there says, praises of Hashem will be heard from the edge of the earth, the kanaf ha'aretz, from the corner or edge of the earth. V'lo mipi ha'aretz. And Chazal say, why does it say from the edge of the earth? Because the pasuk wants to teach us praises will come from the edge of the earth, but not from the metaphorical mouth of the earth. Mipi ha'aretz, which is what we would expect the pasuk to say. Uperish Maharsha, and the commentary of the Maharsha explains, Shezehu onesh shelah, this was the punishment for the earth. Shelo tomar shira bapeh. It was no longer able to say praises and songs to Hashem with its mouth. It had to do it with its knaf, with the edge of praises come from the edge of the earth, not the peh, not the mouth of the earth. Again, this is another idea that would require its own shiur, its own explanation, and its own discussion. What does it mean the earth is praising Hashem? Is of course it says many times in Tehillim, but what does it mean? How can the earth praise Hashem? And what does it mean the earth is no longer able to use its mouth to praise Hashem? It can only praise Hashem from its edge or its corner. Excellent questions, but not our focus right now. The issue is the Zera Shimshon has asked a very strong question on the Rashi in Parshas Nitzavim as to specifically on the reason that Rashi brought, one of the two reasons, on the reason that the earth and the Shemayim were called upon to be witnesses, because the point was being made, the earth and the Shemayim never changed what they did, and also they don't get reward and punishment, but you human beings, Jewish people, you do get rewarded and punished, so you should be even more careful than the Shemayim and Aretz. So Zera Shimshon says, wait a minute, we got to look at Chazal in the Medrash, Rabbah, and in Masechah Sanhedrin, where it talks about the earth deviating from Hashem's will and being punished. Big, strong question. Continuing. Ve'od, and there is another question we can ask. De'ech kara Moshe l'shamayim v'la'aretz liyos edim. How could Moshe call upon the Shemayim and the Aretz, the heavens and the earth, to be witnesses? The Haba Parakama de Avodah Zara, in the first chapter of the Talmudic tractate of Avodah Zara, Amrinon, we say, Shetoanim ha'umos, the nations of the world had a claim. Sheshamayim va'aretz nogim ba'edus heim. They are biased in their testimony. They are not objective in their testimony. And we'll talk about what that Gemara says in a moment. V'yefshar liyos edim, and therefore the nations of the world claim that the Shemayim and the Aretz are not fit witnesses. V'hakodesh baruch hu modeh lohem. And Hashem, according to that Gemara in Avodah Zarah, concedes and admits that yes, it's true, the Shemayim and the Aretz from a certain perspective are biased about the Jewish people's behavior, and they're not fit Eidim, they're not kosher witnesses, they're not kosher Eidim. Let's first of all explain a little bit about what that Gemara is saying, and then we'll explain the question. The Gemara over there says that in the future, Hashem will say to the nations of the world, I can call upon the heavens and the earth to testify that the Jewish people accepted the Torah and committed themselves to keeping the Torah and have kept the Torah and kept the mitzvos. And the nations of the world, according to that Gemara, say to Hashem, wait a minute, the Shemayim and the Aretz, those are your witnesses that the Jewish people are keeping the mitzvos and accepted the Torah? They're not valid witnesses because they're biased. Why are they biased? Because if the Jewish people don't keep the Torah, the nations of the world said to Hashem, then you have said that you'll bring down the whole world, God forbid. You'll collapse the Shemayim and the Aretz. The only reason Shemayim and Aretz in the whole universe exist is if the Jewish people keep the Torah. So they're biased. Of course, the Shemayim and the Aretz, according to this, what the non-Jewish nations of the world are alleging. Of course, they're going to testify that the Jewish people accepted the Torah and keep the mitzvos and will always keep the mitzvos. They need to say that because they know if that's not true, God forbid, then destruction will come to the world, including the Shemayim and the Aretz. So they're not valid witnesses. And in that Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Hashem says, you know what? That's a good point. That's a good point. So how can we how can Rashi specifically in Parshas Nitzavim say that the Shemayim and the Aretz are being called as witnesses when they are biased witnesses? Excuse me. This question is not on that Rashi. This question is on the whole concept of the Shemayim and the Aretz as being called as witnesses. How can the Psukim say that? Excuse me. How can the Psukim say that? This is the most fundamental question so far. Not on Rashi specifically, but on the whole, on the Torah itself. How can Moshe call to the Shemayim and the Aretz to be witnesses when, according to the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, they are biased and unfit to be Eidim, to be witnesses? Ve'od kashelon, and we have another question. Shlosha ta'amim lomoli. Why did Rashi need, in general, to bring three different reasons as to why the Shemayim and the Aretz were called to be witnesses? Okay, so that question is focused just on Rashi. And again, Rashi and Nitzavim brought two reasons. We'll see the reasons momentarily. And Rashi on our Parsha, according to Zera Shimshon, brought one big kind of reason, a kind of hybrid put together type reason of two different ideas. But nonetheless, at least according to the way the Zera Shimshon understands Rashi. Rashi brought 3 reasons about why Moshe called about on Shamayim and Aretz to be witnesses, 2 in Nitzavim and 1 here in Haazinu. And so the question is, why did Rashi need to bring 3? Zera Shimshon's first question is, why did Rashi split up the reasons, 2 previously and 1 now? Why not put them all together and have all 3 reasons in one place? That's question 1. Question 2 was just a few lines ago, why did Hashem and why did Moshe say that Hashem wanted the Shamayim and the Aretz to serve as witnesses when they are biased witnesses? And third question, why did Rashi have to bring 3 different reasons? Couldn't Rashi pick one, his best, strongest reason, and just go with that? What was the point? What was the need for 3 different reasons? Next paragraph. V'nira elisaretz. It would appear that we can answer shehutzrachu shlosha te'amim. 3 different reasons were required. Neged shalosh poronios haboos alehem. Neged the 3 very different types of punishments, chas v'shalom, God forbid, that could come upon the Jewish people, im lo yizku, if they would not be meritorious. If the Jewish people, in other words, at certain times would not follow the Torah and the mitzvos and God's will, God forbid, then chas v'shalom, terrible punishments could come upon them. But those punishments were of 3 different types, and each one of the answers that Rashi brought, each one of the explanations that Rashi brought about Shamayim and Aretz correspond, according to the Zera Shimshon, to one of these types of the 3 punishments. Next paragraph. Lefi sheyesh hapuronios haksuvos batorah batochechos. One type of punishment comes to the Jewish people based on what it says in the Torah in the sections in Parshas Kisavo and B'chukosai called the Tochechos, the warnings, where the Torah talks about horrific, terrible calamities, unspeakable disasters that will fall upon the Jewish people, God forbid, if they depart from Hashem's ways. She'omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so Hashem is saying, Ahu l'shalchom im yecheto. In those sections of the Torah, God is saying He will send these terrible punishments, God forbid, if the Jewish people sin and go against His will, then these punishments could come. Uchaneged elu, corresponding to those types of punishment. That's the first type of punishment, the ones that are mentioned in the sections of tochechos, of rebuke in the Torah. Corresponding to those, Perish Hatam Harishon Beparshas Nitzavim. That is where Rashi's first reason from Parshas Nitzavim comes in. Pasuk ha'idosi bachem hayom es hashamayim ves haaretz. That's the pasuk, the very first pasuk we read before we started this section. Moshe says, "I'm going to call to testify on you the shamayim and the aretz." V'zel l'shono. This is the language of Rashi. V'cha'asher tikra eschem hara. When evil things come upon you and happen to the Jewish people, yiyu edim. Heaven and earth, you will be witnesses, sha'ani hisreisi bachem b'chalzos, that I already used you to be witnesses about this, these warnings, with all of this. Ad kan l'shono, until here's a quote from Rashi. So the first reason, which we're finally seeing word for word verbatim, the first reason from Parshas Nitzavim is that Moshe called upon heaven and earth because heaven and earth were present for Hashem's warnings to the Jewish people, which are seen, which we can read in the Tochechos, in the warning sections of the Torah, with the terrible punishments elucidated, enumerated, and talked about, articulated. And therefore, that's why Hashem told Shamayim and the Aretz. If the Jewish people ever say, God, you never warned us, the Shamayim and Aretz can testify and say, no. You were warned. You were told that terrible things could happen to you, God forbid, if you rejected Hashem and Hashem's Torah. Next paragraph. V'yesh poronios acheros. There is an entirely different type and category of punishments. Sheboos mehamikrim hamishavim ba'olam. That come from accidental happenings that exist in the world. Shemishahu tov v'tzadik, if someone is good and righteous, HaKadosh Baruch Hu yatzileu mipagoyim roim, then Hashem will protect him from these apparently chance events, these accidental type of events and things that are sufferings. Ulehefech chas v'sholem, but the opposite is also true, God forbid. Harishoyim, wicked people, nichshalim, stumble, v'nilkodim bahem, and are ensnared and trapped by these chance punishments, not the punishments that are laid out in an orderly, systematic fashion in the Tochacho sections of the Torah, not those. Chance happenings that come up and happen that people that wicked people can suffer from and stumble from, God forbid. Regarding this idea, it is stated in a pasuk in Tehillim, Shalom Rav La'ohavei Sorasecha, great peace comes to those who love your Torah, ve'ein lomo michshol, and they do not stumble, they do not experience these obstacles and stumbling blocks and chance sufferings. Ucheneged elu, corresponding to these types of punishment events, Perusham, it explains over there in Rashi the following quote. This is Rashi's language and from Parshas Nitzavim, giving the second reason why the Shamayim and the Aretz were chosen. Dover Acher, another explanation, Histaklu b'Shamayim u'va'aretz, look at the Shamayim and the Aretz, the heavens and the earth, shelo shinu es midosam. They have not changed their nature, they have not changed their ways. V'chule, etc. V'afatem, so too you, Jewish people, im tishanu es midaschem shelo lasos ritzonot shel makom. If you, God forbid, change your ways and you go away, you depart from serving Hashem, tiyu nilkodim, you will be trapped b'mikre hazman haboim, in the types of chance things that sometimes happen, shelo keseder uminhag, which is not according to the set seder and custom of the world, which is governed by the Parshios in the Torah that clearly state the terrible punishments that will happen if the Jewish people, God forbid, depart from following Hashem. So the Zera Shimshon, we can already begin to see the pieces falling into place, as the Zera Shimshon says. Each one of the reasons that Rashi brought, the two in Nitzavim and the one in our Parsha in Haazinu, each one of them correspond to a different type of punishment, and Moshe was calling upon Shamayim and Aretz to be involved in testifying to these different types of punishment. So we've dealt with two so far. Let's go to the third. Next paragraph. And there's another type of punishment which comes because of the forces of the constellations. Or sometimes a specific location on earth can cause certain negative things to happen. And corresponding to this, we have the third reason in Rashi, which is the reason given in Parshas Haazinu, in our Parsha. Next pasuk. Ulefi shebe Parshas Nitzavim, hayim medabrim Yisrael, and because back in Parshas Nitzavim, Moshe was talking to the Jewish people. Moshe was not addressing the Shamayim and the Aretz as he does in our Parsha in Haazinu. Rather, he was telling the Jewish people that he was going to use the Shamayim and the Aretz as witnesses. But he was talking to the Jewish people, Mishum Hachi, because of this. Lo perisham el shnei ta'amim. Rashi only brought the two reasons that were applicable. Neged shtei poranios, corresponding to the two types of punishments mentioned above. The hainu, which are osan haksuvos beparshas tochechos. Those punishments, again, systematically laid out and delineated in the sections of the Torah called the tochechos, the rebukes. She'akadosh Baruch Hu sholeach osan, that Hashem sends them. That's the first type. Oshabos bepega umikra, or the types of punishments that aren't described in a systematic way in the tochechos, but they still come into the world in seemingly random or chance ways. But of course, There's nothing random or chance about it. She'HaKadosh Baruch Hu matzil mehem kol hatzadikim, and Hashem saves and protects all of the tzadikim from those types of punishments. So because Moshe was addressing himself to the Jewish people, he talked about those two types of punishment in Parshas Nitzavim. Next paragraph, however, the Parshas Haazinu shemedabrim shamayim va'aretz, in our Parsha of Haazinu, when Moshe is speaking to the Shamayim and the Aretz and actually calling upon them to be witnesses. Perusham dafka hatam ashlishi. That's why Rashi only explains the third reason specifically. Shahashamayim ve'aretz yidnu lahem sachar ve'onesh. That the heavens and the earth are being called upon as witnesses because they're the kinds of witnesses who can also bring rewards and punishments. Lefi hakoach hanishpa lahem, according to the power that has been implanted in them. Next paragraph, top of the next column. Mitechilas briyosam, from the beginning of their creation. Dahainu koach hamazel, which is the power of the constellations, oteva hamokom, or the nature of the places on earth. V'chan dafka kosav, and here specifically regarding Moshe when he's talking to Shamayim ben Aretz, it says she'im yizku yavo ha'edim v'yitnu secharam. The heavens and the earth are witnesses that can come and bring rewards if the Jewish people do the right thing. Kedei litzavos lahem, in order for Moshe to be able to command Shamayim and Aretz sha'afim hamazel lo yiyetov, even if at a certain point, according to the constellations, good things shouldn't happen to the Jewish people. Im kol zeh, nonetheless, im yizku Yisrael, if the Jewish people are acting appropriately and they merit it, yiyu michuyavim hamazolos lehashbio lehem tova. The constellations are obligated to influence things for the Jewish people in the best way. Shahare ein mazel Yisrael, as the Gemara in Shabbos, a famous Gemara, states, there is no mazel Yisrael, which is usually understood to mean not that mazolos have no relevance to the Jewish people, but the Jewish people are not controlled completely by the mazolos. V'zehu she'im yizku v'chule, and this means that if the Jewish people merit it, then we get rewarded by the Shamayim and the Aretz. V'chein lehefech chas v'sholem, but unfortunately so too the opposite, God forbid, that if the Jewish people don't merit good rewards, then God forbid punishments can come from the Shamayim and the Aretz. V'lochein hutzruchu shlosha te'omim, and that is why 3 different reasons were needed. 2 in Parshas Nitzavim that have to do with punishments that were relevant to Moshe's addressing the Jewish people directly, and 1 in Parshas Nitzavim that was relevant when Moshe was calling upon the Shamayim and the Aretz to be Eidim, to be witnesses. The Diek Shapir, and Rashi was very precise, Lichtov Shnayim Shom beParshas Nitzavim, to write the 2 reasons that were appropriate in the context of Parshas Nitzavim, B'tam Ashlishi Dafka Kahn, and the 3rd reason Rashi brought specifically on our Parsha of Haazinu because it was the appropriate reason for the discussion here and our Parsha. So we're going to stop here in this very long section. Let's just quickly recap, because certainly there's a lot left for the Zera Shimshon to explain and to talk about. He asked many more questions than he's answered so far, but let's at least recap what he did do for us so far in this part of the piece, in part 1 of the section. So the Zera Shimshon started by pointing out that Rashi in Parshas Nitzavim gives 2 reasons as to why Moshe called upon the Shamayim and the Aretz to be witnesses. And here in our Parsha, he gave a different reason. And then Rashi posed 3 questions. One question was, why didn't Rashi put all the reasons together in one place, either Parshas Nitzavim or our Parsha of Haazinu? Or alternatively, Rashi could have, if he wanted to, brought all three reasons in both places, if that's what he wanted to do, but he didn't do that. He split up the reasons. So question one was, why did he split up the reasons? And that question, the Zera Shimshon has answered at length and in great detail as to why Rashi split up the reasons and put the first two over there, and Nitzavim, and the third reason here in Haazinu. The second question, this is out of order, but the second question that has to do with the reasons is, why were three reasons necessary at all? Couldn't Rashi just have the strongest one reason and go with that? And the Zera Shimshon has also answered that question, that there are three different types of poronios, of punishments, and by the way, also rewards that can happen to the Jewish people, and the different reasons correspond to those, the three different reasons correspond to those three different types of either punishments or rewards, depending upon the Jewish people's conduct and behavior and commitment to following Hashem's ratzon. And then there's a third question, again, not in chronological order of the piece, but then there's a third question, which is the most fundamental question. How could Moshe call upon the Shamayim and the Aretz to be witnesses? Of course, it's when we talk about Moshe, we mean Moshe saying things and doing things from Hashem's to express Hashem's will. So why did Moshe call upon Shamayim and Aretz to be witnesses when we know from a Gemara and a Talmudic passage in Maseches Avodah Zarah that seems to say Shamayim and Aretz are biased in favor of the Jewish people and would never testify honestly and objectively against the Jewish people? And so how could they be brought as witnesses? And that question the Zera Shimshon has not yet addressed, and that will come later in the piece, and God willing, we'll learn that at some future date. Yasher Koch for joining in the learning in the Zera Shimshon on this week's Parsha. Of course, we have Torah readings on Yom Kippur, but this will set us up for the Torah reading on Shabbos. God willing, all of us will be blessed on Yom Kippur with our tshuva being accepted and Hashem forgiving our averos in their entirety, turning them into zechuyos, into merits, and everyone should have a gemar tov, a gemar chasima tov.